Hello, in this video we're going to discuss global warming part 7, how God created the weather. So in the previous video we discussed how heaven had a furnace. Right, and the furnace developed cracks and God had to replace it. God was sick and tired of having to go to the furnace and climb 15 miles into the upper atmosphere and turn the furnace on or off. The furnace had to burn for 7 days and then be turned off for 7 days and then turned back on again. How God measured this was how warm it was in the air. The replacement of the furnace was the first star. How God created the star was God created a shell and cut holes in it using wormholes and created another dimension full of fuel and layered catalyst all over the surface of the shell and on the inside as well. And then this was placed at a distance that God thought would be alright for heaven. But how God activated it is there's gravity crystal in the center of a wormhole entry point inside the dimension where the fuel is stored. This draws fuel and compresses it, and it turns from a flake form into a liquid. As a liquid, it would appear in the core of the star and then exude through the holes to the surface. It reacted to the catalyst. There's also gravity crystals there that formed an atmosphere, but God never put air inside the atmosphere. He put the gravity crystals there by habit and forgot and didn't realize he'd put them there. This worked out pretty awesome for the first star. The fuel rose to the upper atmosphere and then combusted. The reaction was extremely powerful, and in the planet heaven where the angels were, it caused a disaster. God got all the angels to evacuate from that planet and had to seal off the tunnel exit that allowed them to go outside and play tag. From there, God had to place all the angels, that's 10,000 people, inside a chamber in another dimension. There was total darkness inside and there was no air replacement. So they had to stay there while God tried to figure out a way to fix it. By then, Jesus had been born. This was 450 billion years ago. So God tried to think of a way to fix the problem. This planet did not rotate. So God put a wormhole exit point on the surface. By then it was so hot outside, it was 40,000 degrees Celsius. So God put a wormhole exit point that emitted water, which then turned instantly to steam and produced clouds. The clouds increased in mass and size, and then what happened was a very powerful wind formed and just kept going. So the planet wound up unlivable on the surface, and it did not cool down. The angels were allowed back into the tunnels, and then God started creating a new planet for them to live on. And this planet still exists to this day. What God did was He created a planet with some gravity crystals that were facing in a different direction to the others, and this produced planet rotation, which would allow the distribution of heat from the sun. So He had gravity and atmosphere and planet rotation. God layered this planet with rock and sediment, and then cut tunnels and chambers into the rock so that there was a place for everyone to live in. The atmosphere was filled with air, and God placed the planet in the same dimension near the star, but from a distance, and the planet started to rotate. It looked pretty awesome. God's way to counter this powerful weather system was to create the first moon. The first moon used to rotate, so God noticed that the wind died down when a gravity field nearby was present, so it could slow the wind down. So that's why we have a moon, and our moon does not rotate, because it has gravity fields that point directly at Earth in order to stabilize the weather system. So the first that planet heaven that God created, God also made a moon for it at the same time, and then brought the two into heaven's dimension. And the reaction was spectacular. This massive planet started to rotate. It's 1/4 of the size of Earth, and still exists to this day in heaven. The moon also spun, and then later God discovered that it wasn't necessary to make a moon spin, so it's easier to construct them. And what this produced was the planet spun. It was still hot on the surface, but it distributed heat, and God applied wormhole exit points on the surface in the upper atmosphere that emitted water, which turned to steam, which produced clouds. And that is the first stabilized weather system. So with the presence of the moon, it was possible to have a stabilized weather system. And this meant that there was absolutely no wind, but the environment wound up like Ireland during winter, and that's how the early angels survived. For 50 billion years it was like that. They also had to exist naked. They huddled together in the cold, and then God discovered a way to produce the first garment for people to wear. It was based off a similar material that God had used to produce rope. Again, particles emitted from a wormhole that were knitted together and then cut and formed the white robes that you see pictures of angels wearing. So the white robe is made of a breathable, waterproof fabric that is quite warm to wear. It is thin, it has long sleeves and a hood, and hangs down to your feet. And it is done up in the front with small drawstrings. Goes right up to the neck. The football jersey that people wear is based off it. That is another story. I'm the Archangel Daniel, and I'm from heaven.